Hey everybody, I want to welcome everybody to my YouTube channel, and today we're going to do a little how-to on how to exchange the timing belt on a 05 Kia Sorento. But before we do that, if you like this video, it helps you out a lot, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. Just hit that button below and help me out a little bit. But anyway, here we got 2005 Kia Sorento right here, and I've already torn the engine down to get down to the timing belt, and I'll describe to you a little bit about what I had to do, and I'll tell you a little bit about some of the tools that you got to have to take care of this. But number one of the best tools to have is a ratcheting breaker bar. Okay, and this has got a 7/8 socket and everything on it, and that's used to break the crank bolt, break it loose. And you're going to need the other specialty tool is a torque wrench. Now, I had been borrowing a torque wrench up at the AutoZone, but today when I took the borrowed torque wrench back, I just decided I had enough points on my rewards card and everything, so I just went ahead and purchased this. It's a nice little torque wrench. I had $20 on my rewards card, so that $20 along with the $12 got a nice little torque wrench, and that's the main specialty tools that you're going to need. The other one's some deep well sockets. I think there's a 10 millimeter, 14, and a 17 millimeter, along with some ratchets and a couple of extensions, and you should be good to go. The only other specialty tool I had was a ratcheting wrench here, and that helped when taking the power steering pump and everything off, because there's two bolts that's kind of in there, and if I didn't have this ratcheting wrench, I'd have to have just a boxed in wrench, and it just takes forever. Another tool that's really nice to have that will save you a lot of time doing this job is one of these. And if you have a air compressor with the air ratchet, that will save you a lot of time right there. But if you don't have that, you can just take a regular ratchet, just do it the old-fashioned way. And to let you know what we had to do, CJ, if you'll point it down here, right here where you can see where my hands are. First of all, we started out, we had to take the plastic piece off the top. It's just a few Phillips head fasteners, not really screws, but just these plastic fasteners. Took it off. Took about a minute and a half to get that off. And the other thing was to take the fans out. Your fans sit down right here in this area, and there's only two bolts, here and here, that holds that fan in place. Remove them bolts right there, and you had your electrical plug-ins. There's two. Just unplug them. Fans lift right out of there. It takes maybe a couple of minutes to do that, if that much. So then we get down to the nitty-gritty, and the first thing I had to take loose is the air compressor, and that's probably the most difficult part of all of it, is taking this air compressor or AC air compressor off. And let me get you the bracket here so you kind of see how it mounted under there. Now this thing mounts down under there, and I'm going to show you. Kind of mounts in there like that, kind of like that, and I'm going to show you the bolt holes and stuff. Because there's a couple of bolt holes that are missing. So you'll shine it down there. CJ, step it back just a little bit. Here's your bolt holes there. Can you see my hand down there?
Yeah.
All right. These bolt holes down in there, and they're a little bit of a pain to get to if you're just using a regular ratchet. But again, if you've got one of those air ratchets, man, just get it in there, get them broke loose, and they'll pop right on out. And you'll have your covers. Well, the next thing you're going to start working at is taking this whole piece right here out. And if you'll notice, I've got things laid out so that I know where they're at. And that's a good way to do that. Is you've got this, you got your covers that fit, that cover up your timing belt and everything, and then this whole piece right here that sets down over top of your covers, and this is going to hold all of your belts and all that other stuff. And again, it's fairly, I mean, it's not really complicated. It's just labor intensive to take these out. And the main bolts that hold this piece onto the motor, you got here, these two, you got these 4 bolts right here, and these 2 up here. And but you'll have all your other pulleys and stuff on here that you got to take off first. But it's pretty much just like, you know, like a big jigsaw puzzle. But if you're not mechanically inclined, I would go ahead and send this to the shop. And if you've never done it before and you're somewhat mechanically inclined and you've done some work on cars and stuff before, this is not going to be that technical of a job for you to do. It's just going to be labor intensive. It takes about 4 hours to get this thing broke down to the timing belt and so forth. And I'm going to set these back over here where they came from. But the biggest thing, you know, you want to go ahead and take your battery out. You want to go ahead and take your battery box out. Just get that stuff out of your way so that you can have plenty of room to work. Some people prefer to take the radiator out. I'm one that if I don't have to do it, I don't want to do it. I don't want to add more work to me. And as you see, you can look in here, you can see that there's plenty of room to work in here. The radiator's not in my way. You can take your compressor, once you take your compressor loose from the bracket and you get the bracket out, you'll have to take the compressor loose first. I've got it flipped around here, but there's 4 bolts right here, and they go in from this side, and this thing fits up against the motor like that, and just kind of turn it that way, and that's the way it fits up. You'll notice that on the bottom 2 bolts right here, if you try to, when you loosen them completely up and you try to pull them out while the compressor is still down there, those bottom bolts will hit the vehicle frame right here. So all you do, just loosen the bolts completely, get them completely out of the engine block, and just leave them in the compressor. If you look here, you can see that I've left them in the compressor right there. That's no big deal whatsoever. Plenty of clearance to get the top bolts out, and not a problem whatsoever to get the top bolts out. But it's a little bit tight on the bottom ones here. And you know, a good advice to go by is to take your bolts and stuff. If you have sandwich bags or storage bags, you can take them and put your bolts in those bags, and that way, you know, you won't lose them. Y'all can come on.
We're just leaving.
Okay. So anyway, you'll have you can take your compressor out. It's a little bit of a trick to get it laid up here out of the way, but you can kind of maneuver and get it laid up here out of the way. CJ, step back so you can get the whole picture here. You can get the compressor laid up here out of your way. Once it's up there, it's good. You don't have to take this thing loose. You do not loosen the hoses on it. If you do, you're going to pay and have to recharge your AC system, so don't do that. Another thing here is your power steering pump here. I've got the power steering pump loose. It's moved out of the way here. You do not have to take the hoses loose. If you do, you're going to lose all your fluid. And again, you know, if you don't have to pay, if you don't have to drain the fluids and stuff out, don't do it, because that's just going to be a bunch of extra money, because these kits are going to be expensive enough. And now to get down to the timing belt itself. And CJ, can you see my hands and stuff? Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. If you look down here, this is your harmonic balancer. And this is your crank bolt right here. Now I've got one of the other old crank bolts that I've got. If you'll bring that over here, CJ. This is what your crank bolt looks like. If the crank bolt on your Kia Sorento is gold color, replace that bolt immediately, because those are the recalled bolts, and they had a habit of breaking or backing out of the crank. And we had that problem a couple of years ago with this very vehicle. And what happened with it is that the crank bolt came loose. If you'll shine it down here, the crank bolt come loose, and as you'll see, let me get you some light on the subject. If you'll look, you'll see that the harmonic balancer fits up to the crank sprocket. This is called the crank sprocket right here. Can you see that pretty good there, CJ?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the harmonic balancer fits up to it. On some cars, on some of the old Chevrolets and stuff, the harmonic balancer actually slides up on the end of the crank. That's not the case with these Kias. You got the crank sprocket that slides up on the end of the crank, and that sprocket has a, I call it a little roll pin or hollow pin that sticks out. It sticks out this way down in there, and the harmonic balancer has an accommodating hole on the back side of this harmonic balancer. So when you fit the harmonic balancer up to that crank sprocket, the little roll pin or the hollow pin goes into the hole on the back of this harmonic balancer. And then you put your crank bolt on, torque it down to about 133 foot-pounds. I think the specs are between 130 to 140 foot-pounds. But when we replaced the old crank bolt, we torqued the new crank bolt down to 133. But the old one had backed out and loosened, and it allowed the harmonic balancer to spin. And when it did, it sheared the pin off on the old sprocket. Basically, I just had to go up to the Kia dealership and buy a new crank bolt and sprocket. When we did that job, I took it to a shop that did the timing belt and everything for me at that time. And what they did is they replaced the timing belt. Can you see my screwdriver here?
Yeah.
They replaced the timing belt, the idler pulley, the manual tensioner, the hydraulic tensioner, and the water pump. And this system is supposed to last, I think they say between 60 and 100,000 miles, and up to 5 to 7 years, or 5 to 7 years, whichever comes first. Well, here we are a couple of years later, and this timing belt and this timing kit here doesn't have 15,000 miles on it, I'm sure, and I'm having to replace everything. To let everybody know what we had, what happened is that we was driving along, car was running great, and suddenly it would just shut down, and it wouldn't start, and you had to wait a few minutes, and after waiting about 20 or 30 minutes, it would start and run fine. And finally, the second time it did that, it popped the code on the check engine light. So the check engine light come on, and we took it, run the codes on it, come to find out that it had a bad crank sensor. Now, this is your crank sensor. Can you see that down there, CJ? This wire right here, and this black box or this little black sensor right here, and it's got 2 bolts in it. That is your crank sensor. And when you go buy this thing, it's going to run you about $89. And so that's what was going bad. But fortunate for us, that was going bad, because when I tore it down here yesterday, when I tore the engine down yesterday to get to that crank sensor, this is what we found. If you'll bring this over here, see, I'm going to move these wires out of the way so that you can get a good look at this. What we found was this. You see, can you see how loose that is?
Yeah.
That's what we found on the timing belt. And looking how the timing belt, focus it down just a little bit, looking how the timing belt goes down underneath the water pump here, and I mean, just that is entirely too much slack. And right now, that's what we found. And that the vehicle had been setting for a couple of days before we got to work on it. And so I looked at that, and what I decided to do, I put everything, made sure everything was in time on it, and using the old belt here, made sure everything was in time, reset my tensioner so that it would tighten up back up on the belt, and I rotated the engine around about 4 or 5 times by hand, and it looked pretty good. I crunked the motor up, let it sit here and run for a little bit, then yesterday shut it back down. When I left this vehicle yesterday, the timing belt was in good shape. It was nice and tight all the way around. I knew that I was going to replace the timing anyway, but I was just checking to see what the problem was, because I was going to have to order the kit, so I just had a little time to do that. So anyway, when I left this thing yesterday, the timing belt was nice and tight. Everything looked pretty good. I went inside and decided I was going to order a timing belt kit and everything. But I come out here today, and we just start looking at it, and guess what? There it was, loose again. So after looking at it, what I discovered is this hydraulic tensioner. If you can look down in here, right in between this bracket right here, this is a bracket and this is the tensioner. There's a little cylinder right there that actually comes out, and it pushes against this bracket and moves this whole keeps tension on this tensioner. It pushes this way on the belt and keeps the belt nice and tight. Well, the thing is, when you've got everything aligned in time and so forth, you're doing it on the compression stroke. And I had yesterday, when I put everything in line, I had cam locks on all 4 cams here, and it just so happens this cam lock, when I was working, slipped and came off, and the cams rotated about a quarter of a turn that way. So the pressure on these things when you've got them on in time on the compression stroke, if you let go of these things at that time, they want to go that way. Well, what has happened overnight, this hydraulic tensioner is bled down and relieved the pressure, and it's allowed these wheels to rotate that clockwise manner, creating this slack here. So right now, if I fire this engine up right now, it's going to be out of time. And these are interference engines, so if this engine's running and it jumps time, there's a highly likelihood that it's going to bend your valves or do worse. And to do a valve job on one of these engines it's going to be pretty expensive, so we don't want to do that. So anyway, that's what we had going on. So anyway, I want to show you how we went through, and we just taking your time and taking things down a layer at a time, and then if you'll point over there, taking all the parts as you bring them off and just lay them out in line, making it easy for when you put it all back together. And it's just like putting a puzzle together. And of course, draining your antifreeze into the bucket over there. But I'll tell you a nice cheating way to break this crank bolt loose. And that's just to take, if you got a breaker bar, if you don't have a breaker bar, you can use a 1/2 inch ratchet with a pipe over the handle. But I have this nice breaker bar, so all I had to do is fit it up here. And if you'll look over here on the end, where the way I've got this breaker bar, and it's laying on top of the frame over here, and got it nice and secured up here. And so all we had to do, once we got the breaker bar set up like that, is just go in there and bump the switch. We temporarily hooked the battery back up. Just bump the switch. You don't want the switch to start. You just want to bump it. And we bumped it about twice. Broke that bolt loose. Not a problem at all. And then go ahead and what I do is I like to keep that harmonic balancer on till I've got everything torn out of the way, and then I can take the harmonic balancer off and start getting into the covers and stuff here, which is some pretty simple stuff. But getting down to the timing belt itself, it's not, technically it's not hard, it's just labor intensive. And let me tell you, if you're going to go down that far and have to replace your timing belt, please, by all means, replace the hydraulic tensioner, your manual tensioner, your water pump, the belt, your idler pulley. Go ahead and replace all this. You can buy the kits. You can buy the kits at Rock Auto. There's several different kits that you can choose from. Depends on how much money you want to spend. And just go ahead and buy the whole kit, and that would be the best way of doing it. That way you got everything that's machined together. You get some OEM parts, and make sure you get some quality parts for it. But Kia has had a lot of trouble with these timing belts, that crank bolt. As a matter of fact, there was a lawsuit about the crank bolt. Now, the crank bolt itself has been recalled by Kia, but they're not telling the customers about it. It's just when somebody brings a vehicle in for servicing, they're replacing the crank bolt. And if you have that gold crank bolt, man, get rid of that thing. It's not a hard job to just replace that crank crank bolt. You can get up in there, break the bolt loose just like I showed you. And you may be able to do it without even having to take the fans off. But break that bolt loose and replace it with the new one. And torque it down. I torque them down to about 130 foot-pounds. And which is another thing. When you go to torque these bolts down, what the engine wants to do when you go to torque them down, the engine wants to turn with you. And I'm not going to turn this thing. I'm not going to turn this thing because this engine's out of time right now, and I don't want to fool with it today. But you know, this, when you torque these bolts down, you torque them down clockwise. And that's right now, if I push on this, the whole engine will want to rotate. Okay, and the way you can stop that when you're torquing these engines down, CJ, I'm gonna get up under here. If you'll look up under here, come around here on this side. Come around here on this side right here. Now I have my little creepy crawler, but I'm just too lazy to get it out here today. If you look right up under here, can you see this bolt up under here, CJ?
I see where your hands
okay,
at.
if you see where our hands at, you'll have a plate that goes right here. Just to give you a reference, right over here is the starter. Right over here is the starter. So right here at the front part of your transmission here next to the starter, you have a plate. It's right there. It's got two bolts that hold it on. Just simply remove that plate right there, And I think this is a, what's that, it's a 14 millimeter deep well socket, and all I did was actually fit that up on there, and being right here with the I'm just going to use this breaker bar, but I had my torque wrench here under here. I torqued the easiest way I found was to torque the engine, or torque that bolt from underneath here. And you see how I have my I got a breaker bar here, but if I have my torque wrench right here, I can take and push on this thing right here, and if you'll look over where that wrench is, show over where that wrench is, CJ, the wrench over there. Can you see it?
Yeah.
As I'm torquing, see how that wrench moved, and when it goes up against the side of the engine there, it'll stop the engine right there, and I can torque this. I can torque this bolt now all the way up to the 133 foot-pounds, and that wrench over there with the deep well socket on that bolt right there will keep this engine from turning, and that's the easiest way to do that. And it won't hurt your flywheel or nothing. You're not getting enough torque over there to do anything. All your torque is up here, and it does a fantastic job. That's why I've torqued all of them and never had a problem whatsoever doing it. That just makes things so much easier. And anyway, I'm gonna get my socket back off there before I forget about that thing being there and get up here torquing on stuff. All right, now we can come on up here. Now, as you can see, guys, this is not technically a hard job to do. It's just labor intensive. Being careful of what you're taking off, and place it over in a manner where you can easily look at it and see how to put it back together. One of the things that I did with my fan belts, I'd always take a piece of tape, I number my fan belts 1, 2, and 3 because there's 3 of them, and then just so I would know how the fan belts are routed real easy again, I would just take a picture of them before I took them off. Take a picture with my cell phone. You know, it's not hard stuff to do. These Kias, I don't know, I think in 2010, maybe 2009, they went back to to the timing chains because this was such a big problem with these engines. Other than that, I love this Kia. We've had it for a good while, but this is a major flaw with these things. And I'm glad to see that they're at least correcting this problem with the newer Kias. But anyway, if anybody has any questions about how we took this apart, I'll be doing another video when we get the new kit in, and I'll actually do a video showing us putting it back together. And we already had this one tore apart before we decided we was going to do a video and kind of show people and maybe talk them through what we had to do. One of the biggest problems is taking this air conditioning compressor off. That was the biggest ordeal. Now, as far as taking your alternator off, which your alternator, let me see, CJ, and where'd my light go? There it is. The alternator is going to be right down here. You see I've got the alternator off, and it's just laying over here out of the way. But when you get your main bracket back on, the alternator is going to be right here. And that's kind of a tight fit with the way this thing, if you'll look, and the brackets in here and the alternators on either side of that bracket, and then you have your bolt that goes through. That's kind of a tight fit. And I really couldn't I couldn't pull the alternator back by hand. So all I did is I just got my old crowbar, and you know, if something don't want to move, you give it a little influence. And I just got my crowbar and just kind of put it in there, pop the old alternator right out, not a problem. I say try to work smart, don't work hard. And anyway, when we get the new kit in, we're going to replace everything, even the water pump. Like I said, these things are supposed to last between 60,000 and 100,000 miles. And this whole kit don't have 15,000 miles on it. But since one part has failed, we're going ahead and replace it all because this is such a big job to get down to it. So we're going to go ahead and take care of all of it while we're here, and get this thing back on the road, man, and see if we can't get things taken care of here. But till next time, like I said, we're going to do a video of me putting it back together, and maybe give you some step-by-step instruction on how to do it. And if you guys have any comments, questions, or whatever, leave it in the comment section. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Till then, see you later, and I'll be posting another video, putting this thing back together, hopefully in the week. See you. Bye.